Hello, welcome to the MuseScore Café for today, Wednesday, June 26, 2019. And my name is Marc Sabatella. I'm the Director of Education for MuseScore. This is my weekly series of informal chats where I talk about whatever I feel like talking about that week. And take questions if anyone feels like asking me questions live, participating in the chat. So the topic that I picked to talk about today is customization, and I always pick these topics just sort of randomly based on something, whatever's been on my mind. Um, and I'm just checking my sound. Sorry. So the thing that caused me to think about customization, actually a couple things. One was a presentation I did recently for the International Music Education Summit, which was a online conference basically for music educators. And in it, I did a presentation and I produced some customized kind of skins, if you want to use that term, for MuseScore for the education world. And I took advantage of some features that were implemented for MuseScore 3 last summer as part of the Google Summer of Code that are maybe useful for people to know about. And then also there was a bug that only affects Windows. I think it's only on Windows. It seems to work okay on Mac and it works on Linux, having to do with how some of these customizations worked. And I think I may have just fixed that bug. I need to make sure I didn't break it on Mac or Linux. So anyhow, I've had customizations on the mind lately. So this is what MuseScore looks like when you first start it up, right? I mean, once you get past the initial, like, oh, welcome to MuseScore, let's set up some things for you. Once you get past that, this is what you normally see. And for me personally, as someone who is, one, a fairly expert MuseScore user, but also someone who writes music that's got some complexity to it, the very first thing I always do is change from the basic to the advanced workspace. The basic workspace has, whatever we have here, about 15 palettes or so. And if I open one of them, like the articulations palette, you see there's, 8 elements on it. When I switch to the advanced palette, you'll see now the articulations palette has a whole lot more on it. And now there's an ornaments palette also, where some of the things have moved to, and there's just a lot more palettes in general. And there's a couple other differences. You'll see the toolbars here. We get to see 128th notes, and we get to see double whole notes or brevs, and we get to see the triple dots and quadruple dots, all these extra things that are available on the advanced palette that are not on the basic palette. So that right there gives you, again, the basic palette just had the single dot and stops at 32nd note. So this gives you an idea of what some of these customizations that I'm talking about are. These palettes are really, and these workspace is the term we use for sort of the collection of customizations that you can save and give a name. So down here are the workspaces. So MuseScore comes with basic and advanced. Now you'll see that I have 2 others here, one that says music education, one that says young musicians. Well, these are the ones that I created specifically for that conference. So let me switch over to the music education palette or workspace, and you can see it looks very much like the advanced one. In fact, it's almost like, that's I see now that the way I set it up, it's going to use whichever. Since I was on basic, I still have the basic toolbar here. So that's one of the things that I'll talk about. But when I switch to advanced, you'll see I get the full toolbar. And now when I switch to music education, hopefully I keep it. Yes, there we go. Okay. That's one of the things that we'll learn about, is you can make your workspace include toolbar customizations as well as palette customizations. So this workspace that I created for music education is really identical to the advanced one, except it adds a couple additional palettes. One that's got these Kodai hand signs and the Annotations palette that I think I showed you a couple weeks ago, maybe. And it was just, yeah, I think we talked about this. And I had just created this palette so that you could easily add some different kinds of text markings to your palette that would be colored. And, you know, I added a couple other things like a way to add a grade to your score really easily, so that, you know, a teacher can go in there and say, oh no, this guy got a B or got an A minus or whatever he got. So this shows that I was able to create this workspace that has just a couple extra palettes, but everything else is the same. And I'm going to show you how to do that in a second, but before I do that, I want to show you also a maybe more extreme version. Here's a workspace I created, Young Musicians. In this version, and again, I was working on this a couple weeks ago, so I probably showed you a preliminary version of this, but I want to show you how to make these. You can see now the font just got bigger. I just made the menu font bigger. I made the palettes fonts bigger, and I made it be everyone's favorite punching bag of the world of fonts, Comic Sans if you're an American, I guess Comic Sans if you want to pronounce it in French. Yeah, the eyeglasses symbol was a little thing I remember that is available there, and yeah, it's a nice thing to add to scores sometimes, just to say, hey, watch out for this spot here. I made this Young Musicians workspace be much simplified. So when I say much simplified, it's got even fewer. What did I say? There were 8 articulations before. Now there's only 6. Which 2 are missing? I don't remember. But I simplified things even more. There's fewer things on each palette, fewer palettes. And also, remember that the basic palette went down to 32nd note. My Young Musicians one stops at 16th note. And this is, and also like here, I didn't bother presenting all 4 voice buttons. I'm only presenting 2 voice buttons. And the idea being that for the young musicians, and by young musicians, we're really talking kindergarten through 6th grade, to use the kind of American terminology here. Primary school, you know, students of, you know, up to maybe age 10 or 11 or 12 or so. There are standards in the United States, actually, for how music should be taught. You know, various standards for what students should know at a particular grade level, and there's a lot of leeway, and different districts do things differently, different states do things differently, but there are some national standards in effect, and I tried to adhere to them without totally reading every last letter of everything, but, you know, I tried to make it so that the things that you would typically be teaching kids would be present on here, and this would make the user interface just a little friendlier to young musicians. So how do I keep my palettes off to the left? Okay, all right, so I can see what happened, Colleen. So the palettes normally start off on the left like this. It's docked is what it's called. If at some point you dragged it away, now it's a separate window, and it will indeed cover up your score. The way you can redock it is just move it back over here to the dock area, and then it goes back. It should also work to just double click, and that sends it to the dock. I didn't even know that until like a couple weeks ago. I don't know how long that's worked. There was a bug in some version or other, in some of the early 3.0 versions, that should be fixed now, where sometimes if you undocked it, you would have trouble redocking it until you quit MuseScore and restarted it. I think that was the deal with the bug. But in any case, it should be, everything should be all working now. And if it's not working for you, try closing MuseScore, restarting it. Then you should be able to redock it. So you can do it on the left. You can do it on the right. There's a docking area there also. Can you dock a palette below? I think not. There is a docking area below, but only for the piano keyboard. The piano keyboard window here. See this guy, I pressed P to display the piano keyboard window. And ooh, my Young Musicians palette. My Young Musicians workspace probably should have had that enabled by default. I think I used to have it that way. All right, so let me talk about these customizations now, how you actually go about doing these things. It's like this, to me, is a sort of friendlier look to MuseScore than what we normally might see. I mean, this is what I like to look at. I've got my inspector open here because I tend to use it a lot. I've got my full set of palettes. I got this, complicated toolbar with all these buttons on it and so forth. So this is a version of MuseScore I just built myself. But, this is a little overwhelming for kids. Now, MuseScore is a complicated program, but this kind of simplifies things. It just takes away some of the clutter here and makes the fonts bigger and kid-friendly and so forth. So let's talk about what these customizations involve. The most important customization to know about is customizing your palettes. So I'm going to go show you how you would go about creating one of these custom workspaces and then all the things you can do with it. So I'm going to switch back to the advanced workspace. And the advanced workspace is, kind of the most comfortable one for me. But let's say I wanted to customize this and just add the eyeglasses symbol and some other things to it. So the first thing I need to do is create my own workspace. You can't customize basic or advanced. They're fixed. So I'm going to press this plus sign here. When I press the plus sign there, it asks me for the name of my workspace, and I will call it custom. Now, you'll see some checkboxes here. These are new from MuseScore 3 anyhow. It used to be that when you defined a workspace, basically it only included the palettes. But now we have the ability to kind of control what else is considered part of that workspace. So one of the things that I noticed is when I switched to the music education workspace, it didn't change my toolbars to be the ones that are from the advanced palette. If I had wanted that, if I want to make sure my custom workspace always has these toolbars on it, and I might customize these toolbars, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. In fact, I'm just going to check all of these. But this tells me that the workspace is going to include any customizations I make to my toolbars, and I'll show you how to make those customizations. If I check this, the GUI preferences, this is going to say if I make changes to the font size. Remember how I made the palettes big here and made the font be Comic Sans? It's by checking this box that says those changes apply just to this workspace, not to all of your workspaces. You can also customize the actual menu bar. There's no way to do that from within MuseScore. You're going to have to edit the workspace file that gets saved, and so I'm not going to bother showing that. Oops, did I lose that window? Oh. Yeah, I guess when I clicked outside it, that one. Oh, here it is. Okay. So I'm not going to click the menu bar thing because I'm not going to be able to customize it anyhow. But then also the GUI components. By checking this, it says also remember the state of things like was the palettes present, open, and was it docked? Was the inspector open or not? Was that piano keyboard? So like my Young Musicians workspace, I think I actually intended to have the piano keyboard there, and I think at some point I made a change to it and lost my piano keyboard. I had probably closed it and then after making changes resaved that workspace and forgot that I was supposed to have the piano keyboard open. So anyhow, I'm gonna include this so that I can create a very specific workspace that I can switch to that's going to have whatever I want in it. So I say save, and now I've got my custom workspace. So let's say I want to add something to a palette. Well, when you create a workspace, the palettes become things you can possibly edit. And in order to actually edit something, you need to enable editing for the palette. So I'll have to right-click this and say enable editing. But I personally have an aversion to doing too many customizations. Even though I'm going to show you all these customizations, a lot of them I don't like to do for a couple of reasons. One is the fear that I'm going to have to redo those after some update, and it's just going to be a pain. And I learned this from so many other programs where I used to customize everything. But also, I am in the business of helping people use MuseScore, and it really helps if I'm using the same thing as everyone else, and that I haven't customized things too much. That said, I do like customizations. So what I've kind of learned is how to group my customizations in ways that strike a good balance. So one of them for me is I don't like to mess with the built-in palettes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new palette here. And so I'm going to right-click. You can't right-click this empty area here, which is kind of a drag. But I'm just going to right-click at the bottom and say Insert New Palette. And it's going to give me a new palette here. And I'm just going to call it Symbols. And it's got some default settings here for how big things are and so forth. I'm just going to leave those alone. So it inserts it above Beam Properties, which is why I said it's a drag that I can't actually click down here because I really want to append it down there. But in any case, I can now right-click this and say Move Palette Down. So a little silly thing I had to do. Now I have a nice empty Symbols palette. And I think when you create a new palette, it's already set up for editing. Let's find out. I'm going to right-click it. Enable editing. Yep. So it's all set up for editing. So what I can do now, like if I want my eyeglasses in here, those eyeglasses, they came, remember, from that music education workspace. But the way anyone can get those symbols is you press Z for the Symbols palette. So I created my own Symbols palette here. But the master Symbols palette is enormous. I mean, it's got just crazy, crazy numbers of symbols that cover pretty much every possible musical situation. Way more than I normally want to see. So I'm glad, I have to press Z to show this dialog because I don't want it cluttering up my palettes. But man, there's a few things on here that are kind of useful. So I'm just going to put them on there. And I'm going to type in here eye, and there's my eyeglasses. And then all I got to do is drag. Here we go. I've dragged it from the master palette here to the Symbols palette that I just created. And again, I up display this by just pressing Z. If you can't remember Z, the other thing you can know to get to it is it's View, Master Palette, and then there's all the different palettes here that kind of correspond to the main palettes, but at the bottom is Symbols. And this is where all of those symbols are. And they're kind of divided up by categories, but I had typed into the search box to find the eyeglasses. So another one I like is these multi-bar repeats, and I've been kind of working on, we don't really support these like a 2-measure repeat, but it is a useful symbol. And so you can add the symbol to your score. It won't play back. You have to do some stuff manually, but yeah, it feels like it would be nice to have a little easier access to this. So I'm going to go ahead and add this guy to my custom palette also, both of those guys, the 4-measure repeat also. So those felt useful. I don't know. Well, that's enough for you to get an idea of how you can do this. So you just drag from that master palette. You can also add text to your palette by entering it into the score first and then dragging it in. You don't actually just plain drag. You're going to use Control-Shift drag. So what text do I think I might want to use a lot? Solo. That's something I write a lot. I write the word solo. So I did Control-T for staff text, and now I have solo. Well, I'm just going to Control-Shift drag that into my palette. And now I've got that text that I can add anytime I want. So to add from the master palette to your palette, you can just drag it. But to add from your score, if I try to drag it, of course, it's just going to move it in the score. So that's why there's this Control-Shift. Now, Control-Shift actually does something pretty magic. It's making a copy of that solo. It's what's called a clone of it. And that's what I'm actually dragging in here. But notice that I have the sort of dragging icon showing up here saying, nope, can't drop it, can't drop it, can't drop it. But go here, and now I can drop it. So you can actually use that Control-Shift drag to copy things in your score, including things that normally can't be copied. Like it used to be the case you couldn't copy a hairpin. If I went Control C and then went over here, Control V, it wouldn't work. And I guess you have to select a rest. Now this does work. That's as of MuseScore 3.1. No, as of 3.2 even, I think is when that started working, one or the other. No, 3.1. But I can also use this Control Shift drag, and then when I do that, it makes a copy of it. So anyhow, that's how I can populate this palette here. So now that I've got some things in that palette, what if I want to do some other things? Like what if I say, you know what, my eyes are not what they used to be. This font is just a little too small for me. The font should be the same as whatever your system font is, your system default font. So it should be the same thing you're seeing in, say, this is Windows Explorer. This is the same as this. And okay, so you really could change that just in your overall Windows settings. But if for whatever reason you just really want things bigger in MuseScore, we do allow that. So Edit, Preferences, and here you'll see where I can select what the font is. This is sort of the default Microsoft dialog font that gets used for things like menus. If I don't like that font, maybe I prefer, I don't know, Georgia. Do I actually? Well, yeah, I'm going to change it to Georgia and make it just a little bigger. I can also change the icon sizes. Remember I did that with the young musicians. I made all these icons bigger also. So I might, the icons are big enough. I'm going to leave those alone. But this lets you change the width and the height of the icons. By the way, there's also a dark theme. A lot of people are fans of the dark theme. I'm not so much, but I'll show it to you anyhow. So I hit OK. And now you get to see what the dark theme looks like. There you go. I think I find it distracting because the paper is still white, and I think I would find black paper with white markings like unreadable personally. But this is what the dark theme looks like. There were some improvements made to it again for either 3.1 or 3.2. 3.2 did just release yesterday. I'm going to talk more about it next week because we're also getting ready to update the drumline, the MuseScore drumline extension that kind of goes with it. And so I'll talk about both of those probably next week. But this is the dark theme. So these settings, because I said I wanted GUI preferences to be part of my workspace, these settings are now part of the workspace. I actually don't know if the theme is or not. Let's find out. Let's switch back to advanced. Nope, looks like theme is just a global setting. It's not just part of your workspace. But see, when I switch back to advanced, my fonts got smaller again here and switched back to what they were. And I lost my symbols palette that I created. But then I can go back to my custom workspace and I will get my ever so slightly larger, it's barely larger at all because Georgia I think is an inherently smaller font. But it did change to that other font, and I got my symbols palette back. So those are some of the settings that also become part of your workspace. I realize that if I'm going to use Georgia and I want it to really look bigger, I need it bigger still. I think there's also some of these settings, like when you start MuseScore by default, it shows this splash screen while it's starting up, and then it shows the start center, and then it opens with this my first score here. You can make it so that it just continues the last session. I think we talked about that a couple weeks ago also, or maybe even last week. And that's often a good idea for a lot of people. For me as a developer, I think Mira had commented that was not necessarily all that useful for us, because sometimes we've got like a really big score, and I've got some things that I've like scores that I know are going to crash MuseScore that I have loaded because I'm debugging some problem, and I don't want to always load these scores every time I start MuseScore. So for me personally, continuing where I left off isn't necessarily what I want, but I think for a lot of people, this is probably a really good option. And so that way, if you've got 4 scores open, you close MuseScore, when you open it again, you get those same 4 scores back. Or you can just tell it to start empty with nothing. So these are some of the options. And you can also tell it whether you want to see the play panel by default, which has these playback controls in addition to the standard playback controls. So there's all these different settings here in Edit Preferences that, again, if you select that, if you can use these preferences no matter what, to customize things. But if you want it to only be part of one workspace, so then you can switch back to another workspace, then you select that checkbox when you create your workspace to say you want the GUI preferences part of the workspace. It's a subtle distinction, and probably I'm confusing you unnecessarily. But there's all these other settings also for the background color, wallpaper color, and things that you can customize. So the wallpaper, let me pick a wallpaper here. So now instead of a plain white background, if I'm going to use the dark theme, that might be the key to making this palatable, is now the paper isn't so dang white. Yeah, I could live with this. I might live with this for a little while just to have fun with it. But that Georgia font isn't really doing it for me, but whatever. So these are, again, some customizations over how things look. Because I said I wanted GUI components to be part of my workspace, that means if I close the inspector, because I just don't use the inspector much, I use the inspector all the time. But if you never use it and you close it, it will remember that as part of this workspace, which is why I did that for the Young Musicians workspace. I don't expect the Young Musicians are going to need the inspector often at all. It's for tweaking, small details of the appearance or playback of your score. So I made GUI components part of the Young Musicians workspace and closed the inspector so that the Young Musicians workspace doesn't have the inspector. So again, if I bring the inspector back, inspector is back, I have it now as part of my custom workspace. But if I switch to my Young Musicians workspace, you see the inspector goes away and my keyboard comes back, because that is how I last had it in that workspace. So those are some customizations there. I also talked about the toolbar customizations, which is pretty cool, actually. And this also came from, this came from Werner, the original developer of MuseScore, did some of these customizations. So I look at this, I abhor triple, I don't even like double dots. I'm never going to use triple or quadruple dots, I promise you. I'm not going to write them. So they're just taking up space unnecessarily for me. I'm unlikely to use 128th notes, but whatever, you never know. So these are customizable. There are some customizations you get to just by right-clicking in the toolbar. That's more about choosing which of the toolbars are actually visible and which of the other windows. You can actually bring up the timeline by right-clicking in here, for instance. I guess the timeline doesn't really participate in that dark theme, does it? So you can, if you say, I don't care about this feedback button, and it's true, I don't care about the feedback button. If I want to leave feedback, I'm the one who's going to get that feedback eventually. So make it go away, right? Right click again. What else might I not want? So I never use these icons here. I know the shortcuts. Open is Control O. A new file is Control N. Save is Control S. Save online, I just go to the menu for. But whatever. I don't mind having them there, but I could make them go. What did I just do? Oh, I made the playback controls go away. I clicked the wrong one. I don't tend to use those either. I just hit space, and I don't tend to mess with anything else here. But I'm used to seeing them, so I'm not going to make those go away. But boy, I want to make those guys go away. So I made the feedback button go away. I'm going to leave everything else the way it is here. But I want to show you how to actually, that's how to make sections of the toolbar go away. So this is the note input section of the toolbar. So when I make it go away, you'll see the whole thing just goes away. But what if I want to just control what's on the note input toolbar? Well, for that, I go to View, Toolbars, Customize Toolbars. Now I get this little thing that if you've used other programs with customizable toolbars, it's pretty similar. So I can come here and it's showing me what actions are on the toolbar now, and it shows me what other ones are available to add. There's nothing available to add because this has got the kitchen sink already. Well, let's get rid of that triple dot, shall we? How do I do that? Oh gosh, these buttons in the dark theme I cannot see at all. So the dark theme has been tweaked recently, and let me hover over it. One of these is probably an add, one of them is probably a delete. Let's guess that this one's add and that one's delete. Ha, there we go. I just removed the triple dot, and now I'll remove the quadruple dot. So now they are here under available actions, ready for me to add back. I think I'm going to keep everything else and just press OK. So now my triple and quadruple dots are gone. So, you know, this, I'm already getting tired of I'm getting tired of that font, and I'm getting tired of the dark theme. So, sorry, I got to go back to light. And I think I need to go back to, what was it, MS, what's it called, MS something, MS Shell Dialog 2. Horrible name, horrible name. And I'll make it just slightly bigger at least, because I think I will like that. I think when it changes themes, it has to think for a little while. Here we go. And now I no longer like that cream colored wallpaper either. So I think I'm going to go back and to canvas and just go back to white, because I actually like the white. I like this look. I'm fine with it. So those were a bunch of those customizations. Keyboard shortcuts aren't part of the workspace per se. They're part of the just global settings, but these are great options to know about if I go to Edit, Preferences, Shortcuts. So I said that in my world, I usually like to sort of separate out which customizations I do so that I can get back to the default. Well, part of it was creating a custom workspace. So if I want to do anything fancy, I do it there. And then when I want to remember how most people see things, I can just get back to the advanced workspace. So that's good. The same is true with shortcuts. I don't change the default shortcuts, because then I'll never be able to remember what the defaults were versus what I changed them to, and when I try to help other people, it's going to be hard. But there are certain commands I use often enough that I kind of like to have shortcuts for. But again, I've sort of learned not to rely on customizing them, because then if I have to reset them periodically for whatever reason, I'll have to reestablish them. But there's a few that I find useful, like concert pitch. I'm constantly toggling concert pitch. Well, it's easy enough to do that with a button, but it is useful to know that if I type concert pitch in that search bar, toggle concert pitch. Ooh, there's a shortcut to toggle the concert pitch toolbar to actually make that concert pitch button go away. But I could then, now that I've found the concert pitch command, say define, and now I just type what I want my shortcut to be. What shortcut feels like it would be good for toggling concert pitch? I don't know. I kind of know which shortcuts are available. So there is that. I think the backslash is available. There we go. If it hadn't been available, it would have told me. So let me clear it. I'll click here again. This time I'm going to press equals. It says conflicts with toggle automatic placement for selected elements, which is true. As of MuseScore 3.1, this equal sign is now used. But that backslash isn't. So backslash is now my concert pitch. Another one though, so concert pitch is on the toolbar. I don't find it all that useful. But another one that is kind of useful is hide empty staves. Hide empty staves, you have to go into a dialog box to toggle this option. That is kind of a drag. So let's, I'll just maybe make it be, I'll go to define, and let's see about the vertical bar, which for me is right above the backslash. Ha, lovely. So there you have that. So in order to see that this actually worked, I got a crash after defining a shortcut last week. Oh, no crash. Okay. In order to see that this actually worked, I would have to add some more staves here. Let's add an oboe. No, a transposing instrument like clarinet. So if I now press my concert pitch, you can see my shortcut as I press that backslash. You can see by the key signature it is in fact toggling concert pitch. And if I hit shift with it, now the clarinet staff disappeared. You notice it stays here on the first system because the default, the hide empty staves is under format style. The default here is don't hide empty staves in the first system. That's because, like in an orchestra score, typically you're supposed to show all the instruments on the first system, and then after that you can hide the ones that are empty. My personal use of hide empty staves isn't so much about orchestral scores, it's about lead sheets, where maybe I want to show a bass line. Like I have a melody line, but for one section of it, I want to split to two staves so I can show the bass line or something. So I don't necessarily always want to show that. I don't want to show an empty staff on the first system. If there's nothing on the first system, I don't want to see nothing. I don't want to see anything. So there we go. So now when I press the vertical bar, there we go. The clarinet either shows up or doesn't show up. So customizing shortcuts is a real useful thing. And let me go back to that window. You can also then save a collection of shortcuts. And I always forget that this is a thing, but it's really nice that it is, because it does mean that if I customize a lot of shortcuts and then I'm worried about losing them after resetting, because I have to reset to factory settings pretty often as a developer, because you make all these changes to imitate what some user did to try to reproduce some bug, and then you're like, oh, I got to get back how things were, or for other reasons. So I'm often having to reset everything to factory settings, which, by the way, is under Help, Revert to Factory Settings. So I'm doing that more often than most people would ever need to. But anyhow, if I go back to my shortcuts, there is a save and a load button here that will save your whole shortcut configuration, which can be nice if you've customized a lot of shortcuts and you are worried about losing them normally after an update. You don't lose your settings, but if it's a major update like from MuseScore 2 to MuseScore 3, enough has changed that does happen. Or if you're moving from one computer to another, or if you've just had to reset everything, but boy, you just didn't want to lose your shortcuts, this would be a way to save those customizations. So those are some of the customizations available. There's more to it than that. Let me bring up that play panel I mentioned before. Here's the play panel. The default position of the play panel is down here, kind of stealing space from the inspector. Well, I don't like that. I'm going to undock it. So Colleen had mentioned something that implied she had undocked it, perhaps accidentally. So undocking something is a possibility. Then you can redock it, and if I redock it down here, there you go, it's down here, sharing space with the inspector. But the other thing you can do is dock it right on top of the inspector, and now you have tabs. So you have my face is covering this, right? Let's go back. I have to remember that. Bye me. Okay, you have these tabs down here, so the play panel and the inspector. Probably you don't need them at once. On the other hand, you probably don't really need your play panel to be that tall either, so it's probably harmless. But anyhow, that's another way you can sort of customize how things are laid out. All of these panels are adjustable, the width of them too, so I can make that panel wider. And the same with my palettes here. I usually set my palettes to be wide enough that the key signatures will display 3 across. I don't know, that's like a little quirk I have. And then I also have to make sure my lines will still display at least 2 across. That's like how I like things. Sometimes I'll say, no, I want my palettes wide enough for the lines to display 3 across. But then the whole palette window is a little wider than I want. I don't know. I do obsess about little details like that to try to get things set just how I like them. So that's one of the reasons I talk about, I'm going to put this back the way it was, which was docked down at the bottom. And now I'm going to make it go away because I don't really use it much. So I do obsess about a lot of these details, so I do appreciate having these different customizations available. So I showed you how to customize the toolbars. I showed you how to customize palettes, how to create a workspace. I showed you some of those GUI settings. I showed you about docking these windows. I showed you about customizing shortcuts. There's probably a few other customizations here and there. I mean, there's lots about customizing the score, right? The style settings. I've talked about that in previous cafes. But here, I'm not talking about your score. I'm talking about how MuseScore actually works. I'm talking about, how you interact with the program, not how big your title font is. I mean, that's a customization also, I guess, but that's more tied to a particular score, the appearance of your score, and that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the overall user interface is kind of what I was talking about today. So, all of that said, let me just send you the link in case anyone wants to play around with that education thing, and because I do have that link handy. Here is the link to where you can download extensions. So once you've created a workspace, it's there, and when you close MuseScore, it'll always be available to switch to. Let me just paste this link for a second, then I'll continue my thought about that. There we go. This custom workspace, which is the one I created here, it shows up in this list down at the bottom, and that'll always be there now for me, along with the other ones. So that workspace, though, is now just tied to this computer. There is a file that if you know how to find the workspace file, it's like buried somewhere that's different from Windows and Linux and Mac, and it's not meant to be easy to just transfer workspaces from one computer to another. But there is a facility that we have devised in MuseScore to package up that workspace, and also anything other customizations. Like we've in past cafes talked about creating templates, and there's some other customizations that are available also like that. Creating templates is just saving a score. If you set up a score the way you like it, save it, and when you save it, instead of saving to your scores folder, which is where scores normally go, I'm going to go to MuseScore 3 templates. And if I save a score here, it'll then be available as a template. Okay, I need to get my cat again, so this is an opportunity for you to see. Oh, I turned off the dang thing, right? All right, here comes my cat, because she's misbehaving. Hi, everyone. This is Claudia. So, Claudia is one of our two new naughty cats, and she doesn't really want it. She's in hyperactive mode as opposed to sleep on my lap mode, which are her two modes. So, there you go. Okay. If you save to your templates folder, then you have a template, and it'll be available next time you create a score from a template. So we have created this extension mechanism that allows you to package up a workspace and templates and some other things, sound fonts, and call it an extension. And then this extension can then easily be installed. Now, we didn't make it easy for people to create their own extensions yet. Eventually, probably that will be possible. But that is what I just sent you a link to, was an extension. It is possible to create your own. I had to figure out how to do it myself. It's just a zip file that you combine the workspace. You find the workspace file, you find the templates, and you combine them all up into a big zip file. But if you go to the page that I sent you the link to here, you'll see the download link for the extension. And then after you download the file, all you will do is drag and drop it. So that thing is somewhere or other. I don't even know where I put the file, but whatever. Oh, I know. It's probably under downloads. Apparently not. All right, well, wherever it is, if I had it, I would just drag and drop it into MuseScore like this, and then that would install that extension, and then you would be able to get, so that is how you will be able to get that music education extension if you want, and it will give you those 2 new workspaces, and it will give you a couple of templates that I created. Hi everyone. Great. I am really happy to see this. So how do you get the timing of the score? So this, I don't know what you mean by the timing of the score. I mean, if you enter the notes with the right durations, if you enter a half note, you get a half note. So I guess the answer is enter the notes the way you want. But MIDI, MuseScore is a notation program, not really a sequencer. So the way MuseScore normally works is you have to enter the notes one at a time. You, if you want to enter a half note, you come here. You say note input mode by pressing N, you select a half note, and then you press the key on your keyboard. Then you want an eighth note, you select eighth note, press the key on your keyboard. That is how MuseScore is designed to work. It's a notation program, so it's designed to let you enter the notes. Now there is a mode here, the real-time mode, that will attempt to decipher the rhythms for you when you play them and let you enter things in real time. It's a bit complicated to use, so what I will tell you is if you go to Help, Online Handbook, it's complicated to use and it's quite limited. I mean, it is, if you're expecting magic where you just play whatever you want with both hands and you just get readable sheet music, that is the equivalent of bringing, say, I like to use the analogy of saying, bring your cell phone into a movie theater, say, hey Siri, transcribe this script, and then ask her to transcribe every line of dialogue. That's just not going to happen, right? I mean, she can barely understand you when you speak, hey Siri, give me directions to the restaurant. Oh. Okay, Siri just answered me. Yeah, so MIDI is going to have the same limitations. It is not going to be able to sort out all the complexities of everything you do. But if you just play Mary Had a Little Lamb, it will figure that out. One ding, 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 ding. It's not going to figure out blah, 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 blah. It's not going to figure out all that. But so if you do want to do that, you go to that online handbook and then search for I think it's under, well, it says note input modes. It's under here under advanced topics, note input modes. And then if you look under the real-time automatic, it's going to describe how to use it. The description is good for what it is, but even better is if you go down to where it says external links, there's a video that explains the process in more detail. So again, the way you get to that real-time mode is this little arrow next to the note input button, real-time automatic, real-time manual. But after you read that handbook, it'll explain that, but it'll also explain how to use it, because it's definitely on the complicated side. But the capability is there. But again, if you're expecting magic, if you're expecting to just play the piano and have readable sheet music come up, the world isn't there yet. The world just isn't there yet. That's kind of my show for today. That's what I wanted to talk about, having to do with customization. Next week, most likely, again, I will be talking about MuseScore 3.2. I thought maybe I'll talk about it this week, but I do want to wait until this update to the drumline palette, the drumline extension is out, so I can, if there's anything worth talking about with that, I can talk about that also. As always, I'm interested in telling you what you want to hear. So, maybe I'll talk about real-time MIDI input on some future Café and try to demonstrate how that works. I'm not particularly skilled at it. I mean, I'm a skilled keyboard player, but playing it in just the right way to get MIDI MuseScore, it's way faster for me to enter notes one at a time, the standard way, than to attempt to get MuseScore to figure out the rhythms as I'm playing them. I'm going to have much better success, much faster just typing the notes in. I can go ding, dun, 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 5, bum, 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 5, bum, bum, bum. Right, I can type that about as fast as I could play it and with perfect accuracy. But yeah, it would be good for me to get better at the real-time input so that I can help people with it more. So maybe that will be a future cafe topic. So thanks for indirectly having suggested that. If other people have suggestions, feel free to send them along. All right, I've gone on more than long enough, so I think I will bid farewell and see you next time. Bye.